just want to thank you all for joining us today for our second working group. We're doing these monthly, and we're going to hop right in because we have a full agenda. For those who don't know, I'm going to click to your participants today, the facilitators of today's call, so we can do quick introductions. But my name is Leah McGrath. I serve as the Executive Director of GovRAMP, and am just thrilled to be joined today by my counterparts, Fred Britton and David Ressler. So you'll hear from them throughout the call. Fred is an executive advisor to GovRAMP and manages the PMO. And David Ressler is our PMO director. And you all hear me say this every time because you probably know him best from our monthly office hours. He's phenomenal. But we're just so thrilled to have you all with us today. A couple of housekeeping items. We are recording the call, as I mentioned, but also because of the number of participants, your microphones are muted. But we are going to encourage you to use that chat and Q&A if you have questions, if you have comments. As we get into this, if we really find that we need to have a discussion, we're open to that as well. So we are hosting these meetings, these monthly working group sessions, really to kind of bring information to all of you as our members. We are all participating in the ongoing FedRAMP working groups as they look about how to iterate and innovate that program. And as we're participating in those working groups, we're also looking at the ideas that are out there to see, hey, what are things that we should be thinking about for GovRAMP? So it's kind of twofold. It's one, to make sure that we're updating all of you on what we're hearing, what we're seeing. Two, we want to hear from you. What's most important to you? What do you think? What questions do you have? And I should have said threefold, because three, then, to also give us input when you see an idea that you think would be really great for us to look at. We've said before, but I'm going to say it again. We really pride ourselves on being agile and innovating through iteration, and want to be that playground, that proving ground for trying new ideas and continuing to advance cloud security. So David, Fred, anything else before we jump in?
Thank you for the great introduction, Leah.
All right. Well, we're going to hop in. So last time, if you attended our April call, we really walked through what we were seeing in each of the 4 working groups. As we've been participating and aggregating kind of our insights and takeaways, one thing that we've seen is that we're starting to see some similar threads across the 4 working groups. Also, since we met last, FedRAMP has posted more about a pilot that they're going to open in June. And they also have some open requests for comments. Those items are really what is driving some of the themes and conversations across all of the 4 working groups. So what we thought would be a best use of our time is to report back on the pilot, the open request for comment, kind of items, make sure that you've seen these, know what's happening with those, have an opportunity to provide comments, and we'll have some dialogue and conversation as we go too. So as we get into this, if we're missing anything too, would invite those who are participating to also fill in, right? Add your conversations and comments to the chat, to the Q&A. And I would say that this by no means replaces, if you want to participate in the FedRAMP working groups, do so. If you want to give comment to the FedRAMP, open request for comments, please do so. We're just merely reporting back kind of what we're seeing for your benefit, and also to kind of hear your comments and thoughts. So as we get into kind of the heart of it, there are 3 different open requests for comments, RFCs, right now. These are all due May 25th. You can comment now. There's actually dialogue happening. It's interesting. It's a different way to do open request for comments. If you've been on GitHub to see this, there's a little bit back and forth and people kind of asking questions, commenting on other comments. But if you'd like to give formal comments, those are due by May 25th. So we're going to walk through 3 of these open requests for comments just at a high level. So as we dig in, we're going to start with the request for comment around the significant change notification standard. Now, David and Fred, I know this is something that we actually have talked about quite a bit as well. Significant change standards is certainly something that that we have a lot of conversations around at a high level. What, this is coming, at a high level takeaway. Please read the standards yourself if you have questions. But what it appears that there is being proposed is really further definition of the types of significant change. So you have adaptive changes, transformative changes, and a different process for each of those. And then, of course, impact categorization changes, things that would change you from going from a low impact to moderate impact to high impact, would require a full authorization change. And that has been that way for a while, right, David? So really it's looking at the adaptive change and the transformative change process and kind of timelines they're putting into place. So David, I'll toss this to you. I know we've had some conversations around this item, but kind of what are your main takeaways here, and what are some things our members might be interested in?
I think, first of all, I would like to say it's kind of exciting to see the significant change process get updated, because the current process is somewhat vague and hasn't been updated in 5+ years, if not longer. And as the technology has evolved, as the way of doing things have evolved, the significant change process has yet to keep pace with that. So excited to see that, there's thought given into that significant change process and how that can be modernized, if you will. The concerns that I have, though, is that the adaptive change versus transformative change isn't well defined. What we've heard over and over again from our members and from our 3PAO community is that concrete examples are great, that having more color around how to interpret what is this type of change is more meaningful. So part of the feedback that we'll be providing is around that. And we invite the community to also provide your input to FedRAMP directly or to us for commentary as well. Because I think having those more concrete guidance on which, am I performing a transformative change? Am I doing an adaptive change? Is more meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one other comment that I'll make just regarding the RFC process as well is, as I understand it, this is the last step prior to formal adoption of these documents. So if you have some commentary and you want to see it incorporated, this is the last chance before it gets published as a ratified document.
Yeah, absolutely. Fred, anything else to add on this standard?
Yeah, other than just sort of echoing what David said about the adaptive change, both one being a great idea and two needing some definition, from folks that we've heard from on the provider side about this, they really have to think about their own project management and develop and build in all that time, make sure the 3PAO will be ready to go and really structure all of that. And the changes that are, necessary and more immediate, this is a great process. Once it has some definition, I think will be excellent.
No, I agree. I think that, from the government user standpoint, it can be frustrating sometimes when you see these great updates happening in the private sector or other industries using, but you can't use them because you're waiting for a process or review. So we definitely know that some changes are needed to streamline this process, to bring that innovation to government faster. So I agree with all that said. One thing I was thinking about, David, is as you were talking about the ambiguity, it's hard to contemplate every case scenario. Right. So making sure that I think another great practice, and we've talked about this even, is ongoing being able to have that documentation of precedents or as they make those up, some kind of repository that keeps that updated. Right. So that we're constantly communicating what is an adaptive versus transformative change, what are the different scenarios, and to be able to have that dialogue will be important. All right. So from those attending, any other comments? And I should have said, if you have thoughts, drop them. If you have questions, drop them in, and we will do our best to to be able to address those. But if you have anything else on this significant change notification, let us know if you have ideas or questions. But that's one of the open requests for comments that we'll be responding to. So now we get into another area, and we wanted to start with these two open requests for comments because these are more similar to the current process, right? So we're thinking kind of current process. So we have request for comment for minimum assessment scope standard. Now this one's really interesting. It's a conversation again that we've had often here, which is around the authorization boundary. So what you see on the screen are just excerpts from the full standard that is out there. But this is another interesting one, David, to your point. Our understanding is that this is the last draft to be seen before adoption. And when this is adopted, it will replace all prior, it says rescinds and replaces all previous guidance related to boundaries. So this actually has a pretty significant impact. And I'm really curious what 3PAOs and providers who've gone through this process have to say or think about this. You can see it defines some minimum assessment scope around handling federal information and or likely impact of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of federal information, but kind of speaks to each agency needing to define that. David, Fred, thoughts? I'll toss it to you first.
So anyone who's done a FedRAMP assessment or been involved in any sort of NIST 853 type assessment, FSMA, FedRAMP, even GovRAMP, understands that drawing that authorization boundary is one of the most onerous tasks of the whole process. And it's also one of the first things that needs to be done when thinking about your assessment, because it defines the scope. It defines what's in bounds for an assessment, what's out of bounds. It defines so much of where the controls come from and such. So it is very important. There have been at least now, I think this is the fourth draft, essentially, of boundary guidance. Only the first draft had been ratified. The second draft included this concept of it that really caused problems within the greater community, because it was where FedRAMP had stated that you have to keep your documentation and metadata, so data about your system, inside a boundary that is protected and what's the exact terminology used? It has to be at the same impact or greater level as the documents that the system that it's documenting. That caused a lot of concerns about, is my GRC system legitimate to be able to host this data? It caused concerns around, can I share this data with my 3PAO even, because their system isn't authorized at that same level. It caused a lot of problems with sharing it with other organizations, such as an assessment firm if you're going to do an alternate framework, or even with GovRAMP. So that's some of the feedback we'll be providing to FedRAMP regarding this scoping document, is that needs to be also defined better in here. And the guidance, much like the previous one, is kind of vague. It's a great mantra as far as likely to impact confidentiality, integrity, and availability of federal information. I would say government information as a whole, thinking about our community, but also giving those concrete examples of what would be in scope, what would not be in scope, and also where you transcend from a boundary that you're hosting to another boundary from a service provider, such as your SCAP scanner that's an authorized product and such, and those integrations. So lots here that still needs to be well developed, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I don't know if we have any folks on who would want to give their kind of impressions, but what this would really change for how you would approach, your boundary diagram, because you still have that baseline, right? Like I'm thinking about if you have to define your boundary for authorization, and you wouldn't want to go through that 3PAO process or the full audit process only to have to continue to amend it over and over again every time you work with another agency. So how do you do that in an efficient way? But I agree, David, there's been confusion around this area for a while. So I think it's a good step forward generally. It's the devil's always in the details, as they say, right? And some of that will just be fleshed out as we go, I would imagine.
Yeah. And Bill, I see your note in the chat and could not agree with you more.
Yeah. And that chat, sorry, Fred, just David, for the recording, in case the chat is not shown, I don't think it is, that we had someone say, I'm concerned about this. All customer side components, quote, are outside the scope of FedRAMP. FedRAMP has 5+ years of precedent of including CSP provided agents, appliances, and the like. And so, David, you were saying, yes, concur, correct?
Yes, correct.
All right.
So if I could just add, the other thing I think that is relevant to our conversation with our members is, and coming from state government, we used to do cloud products for some certain use cases and say we will accept a FedRAMP authorization. So the other thing, that I hope that our government members are paying attention is, does that mean anything for existing products they have where they accepted a FedRAMP authorization, and thinking about that moving forward? So, so the additional clarification will be very helpful for them.
Great point. And that's something that we should include in our comments when we're thinking about the entire ecosystem and how we fit together. All right. Anything else on this? We welcome your comments and questions. We are going to continue moving to this third request for comment area, and that is really around the pilot. So FedRAMP has announced that in early June, I forget the date, it's like June 3rd, maybe June. First week of June, June 3rd, I think, they will begin a pilot. And this is really around looking at how they can, start with pilot eligibility, specifically looking at those low impact SaaS providers. And this is a pilot for what they call 20X, for what it could look like, right? Looking for machine readable reporting on low impact SaaS, meeting what FedRAMP is calling the key security indicators. And so what they are looking for is input in this request for comment, input specifically on the key security indicators that they've outlined. And Fred, thank you so much for those who aren't looking, but in the meeting chat, Fred's been dropping the links so you can read directly what FedRAMP has published. So this is just kind of high level. What they're talking about is for those low impact SaaS providers, here's what the eligibility criteria looks like. They need to be deployed on an existing FedRAMP authorized cloud service offering. They need to be using primarily cloud native services from the host provider, using only FedRAMP authorized external services. A service is provided only via the public internet, has completed a SOC 2 Type 2 audit or federal agency ATO process within the last 12 months. So that's the criteria for being able to participate in this pilot that is published right now. And again, this is open for comments. Then we get into the key security indicators. I'm just going to give a quick overview and then we'll talk about it. So here's an example of what they've published for each of the key security indicators they've outlined. You can see there's an example. They show the change management for the key security indicator, the validation cloud service providers must, and they'll give a few bullet points here. And then they've identified related NIST 853 controls. So that's for everyone. So we put this in a table. This is probably difficult to see, but again, we'll send this out so you can see this. But this is kind of our attempt at summarizing the key security indicators at a high level, just so we can talk about them today. But you can see these are the KSIs that they have defined. The description, all of this comes straight from their the documents for the request for comment, and then the related NIST 853 controls that were identified in their document. So what they're asking for comments are, pardon me, is regarding the KSIs. And I think we could probably comment on the eligibility requirements as well, based on how I'm reading the request for comment. So that's what's being proposed. I see a comment in the chat, and it says, to clarify, if a CSP SaaS offering is deployed on AWS commercial, which is FedRAMP authorized, that would suffice for number one, deployed on an existing authorized cloud service offering. I don't know if that's a statement or a question.
Yeah.
David, I don't know if you have
Yeah. It is consistent with our understanding, but I will also caution, not every AWS commercial instance is FedRAMP authorized. So ensure that you are on one that is in scope for that authorization. Would be the caution I'd throw out there.
Okay, awesome.
Yes, and Thomas clarified that east and west, and that's concurrent with my understanding
Fantastic.
of which ones are authorized. So thank you, Thomas.
Looking at this, we're still doing some analysis, I know, of this, kind of pilot and the KSIs, but high level, David and Fred, what are your thoughts? And I'll chime in as well, but invite those in the audience to kind of comment too.
So as Lee and I were looking at this earlier today, one of the things that we decided we were going to do is look at each one of these related controls. And similar to everything else that GovRAMP has done in developing programs, we look at the MITRE protection value that each control provides, because we want to make sure that the controls that map to the KSIs are actually meaningful, impactful controls. And we do a lot of data-driven analysis when we do these exercises, where we want to make sure that we're focusing on what makes impact, because we don't want to spend our time, you don't want to spend your time on things that aren't relevant, which I think is part of the whole reason behind some of the 20X mindset, if you will. So we'll be doing that and providing that information in our feedback to FedRAMP. One of the other questions that's come up is, are each of the KSIs weighted the same against each other? Or is there a weighting factor to be applied to these? Because, I always take the mindset of all the controls are important, but some controls are more important than others. So that's also some of the questions that we have and will be asking.
Yeah, I know one of the other questions that has come up a number of times when we've been looking at this is, do these KSIs as kind of presented also meet the FSMA requirements that we know some of the agencies have a mandate to follow as well? So that's something that we can look into and welcome your input as well to make sure this coverage would be enough to be sufficient, right? Or where would the deficits be if there are any? Great kind of summary, David. Fred, what thoughts? Anything else?
Nothing in addition. I think that, just to summarize, David, the idea of applying MITRE weighting is a great idea to think about what's a little bit more valuable. So I, just sort of following along, saying I think that's we'll submit that and would love to see that outcome. I think it's been very impactful with our programs that don't look similar to FedRAMP. Where we've had the opportunity to really prioritize which controls and give a meaningful, if you're gonna put your effort in and you have this much effort, make sure it's going as far as it can. So I love it.
I love that. We did have in the working group conversations. I think we mentioned up front that a lot of the working group conversations are starting to have a common thread across all four. So I'm hopping. I know some of us are going between all four working groups and you're like, oh, that question was asked in this one. And so you're starting to see a lot of overlap, which makes sense. A couple of things that we've seen today, there's been a thread. There's one of the working groups, and I think it's working group 3, has a question, but this might be in all of them, where they said, this is a thread for you to ask any questions that you may have regarding the pilot. And so we have posed the question, would the pilot accept, someone who has a GovRAMP ready or GovRAMP authorization to be able to kind of, participate? Because David, I know, as you've said, our OCM is pretty machine readable in its CSV form. So could that be something that is an opportunity? And so we'll be continuing to comment on that, and that will be part of our comments, but also welcome all of your thoughts there to be a part of that pilot. There's also a couple different threads, a number of threads around the use of a SOC 2 from an eligibility standpoint. So those are kind of the two main threads I've seen. David, I don't know if you want to weigh in, and Fred, on that SOC 2 Type 2 report, what KSIs can be validated or not is a question that certainly FedRAMP is looking for insights on.
Yeah, as I've looked at that same commentary, Leah, around what KSIs can and cannot be validated, one theme I'm seeing consistently is it depends. It depends on if you have the tooling in place to be able to do that validation. And some of those things, it also depends on if the infrastructure that you're running on, if the cloud service provider you're running on exposes those things. And if you want to expose that further to automation, but through your 3PAO and or FedRAMP directly, in some ways you're turning over a read-only key to that entity to be able to pull in those KSIs in the machine readable format in a consistent, automatable, and repeatable process. If it's a one and done, it's one way of doing it. If it's a, hey, I'm going to be doing this continuously, it's another way of performing that function. On the SOC 2 front, the magic between a SOC 2 assessment and some of the other assessments is not necessarily in the controls that are selected, but in the way it's assessed. Within GovRAMP and within FedRAMP currently, there are NIST guidance on assessing a given control and well-defined processes for assessing that control, interview questions, evidence collection, etc., that may or may not be consistent with the SOC 2 way of doing things. So there's really an exercise to drill into how the SOC 2 assessment was performed. When you look at a FedRAMP assessment today and you look at a GovRAMP assessment today, one of the things the 3PAO has to submit is the Security Assessment Plan, or SAP, which describes how those controls were tested. That does not exist with the SOC 2.
Yeah, I think, and I'm seeing a few names on our chat that I've also seen in the GitHub for the FedRAMP working groups, and I love it. And so, Troy, thank you for your comment and really just clarification that the eligibility criteria are not mandatory. It says they're suggested, but no eligibility requirements for that phase are required. They're just trying to kind of identify what companies may be best positioned. So that's good insight, Troy. Thank you. The other thing that the other thing I was going to say, and I'm curious if others on the call agree or disagree with me, but my take has been a little bit of pushback on the idea of relying on SOC 2 audits without seeing the evidence because of the variability and other things noted. There were some comments around just a concern on either burdening the FedRAMP staff because they'd have more actual work to do to sort through it. And there have also been some comments around, this is dangerous, Fred, I'm looking at you because I'm relying on my memory here, but also some comments around this could actually create some additional costs because you'd need maybe to be engaging a 3PAO for more customized work to be able to evaluate the things you haven't already evaluated or covered in a SOC 2, which you may not know until it gets through that FedRAMP office. So it's why you do a pilot, right? Is to sort some of this out. But those are some of the initial comments that I've seen in the working group chats around the SOC 2 Type 2 as an audit being provided. So that's been an interesting dialogue. Oh, this is a question Fred and David, I'm going to toss over to you. We talked about this quite a bit. Has GovRAMP mapped key control considerations under the SOC 2 trust services criteria to the NIST 853 controls and KSIs on the previous slide?
We have to the 853. We've not done the exercise against the KSIs to the best of my knowledge right now. And that gets back to my previous comment of, the control mappings are one thing. It's the assessment methodology that really matters. And because there's not a wide-ranging, well-published guidance on the assessment methodology, that's a bit harder to do. It's the old adage of your mileage may vary.
Fred, yes.
And I did ask a team to go through an exercise last week of doing some mapping for me, just to try to help understand. And, so they went through a SOC 2 and they went through 853 controls, and the notes field was the thing that just really jumped, because you have a concept here. It doesn't necessarily map to a control. So you can't say, is it satisfied? Is it not? And so, as David said, there's perhaps a little more subjectivity within a SOC 2. So it's sort of difficult to say, well, this has a general statement. And, if that general statement is true, these NIST controls could also be true. But it really comes down to, how is it really looked at? And, as SOC 2 kind of varies a little bit with the assessor, it just leads to, it isn't an easy mapping.
Yeah. Well, I think kind of expand on that, because I see a note around the robust testing for the SOC 2. Yes, thank you for that comment. I think that it's really around, it's not an apples to apples, right? And so I think that's the challenge that is faced when you're talking about how do you understand that mapping. But that's something we'll continue to do some work around as we prepare our own comments to the KSIs for this 20X phase 1 pilot. So I love these questions. It's just really sparking more ideas for more work, David and Fred. So we're we're happy to do that, and we'll report back. We'll be sure to report back and make sure that you all have copies of our comments too. Making sure I've kind of covered. Oh, there was a question on this, and I will say this is a good question regarding how you could address with the desired automation some of these KSIs. That has come up a number of times in the working groups, whether it's really all of these. For every KSI, there's probably a thread on how do you automate this or address this with the desired automation. And certainly some are a little easier said than others. But David, I don't know if you have any thoughts specifically, or if that's something we need to think a little bit more about. And I'll read the comment here, but they actually included one as policies, procedures with KSIs. Any clue on how this could even be addressed with the desired automation?
Not really, no. Policies and procedures are one of those things that it really depends on the base framework that the organization uses, especially around policies. Prior to joining GovRAMP, I worked for an organization that really adhered to the ISO 27001 and other commercial frameworks, and we layered in the NIST on top of that. When we did that, we found so much missing items that are expected by NIST that we had to supplement and rewrite some of the policies around, just to make sure that we were inclusive of everything. So when you start doing that and you blend in different frameworks, the amount of information that's there mushrooms, as well as when we do that, you get into some places where you have to manage to the high watermark. So a automated assessment, and we see this with SCAP tools as well, where it'll be looking for a very specific value in a field. For instance, password complexity is a great example. Some policies or some frameworks will suggest you have to have a 12-character password, password complexity, et cetera. Others will say 8's sufficient. So when those automated tools are looking for that value, they need to make sure that they're looking for greater than or equal to 8 or 12. Because if I go with 14, I obviously clear the bar, but some of the automation will say you failed because it was looking specifically for 8. So that's a cautionary tale, if you will.
Yep. Lots of good, I'm interested in, if you haven't, you can see some of the comments that have been posted already, and participate in these working groups. But as we've said, if you've got things that you think are really important for us to look at from a government perspective, we want to hear that too. Kind of moving forward off of this, there was another kind of takeaway we wanted to make sure that we talked through today and kind of shared back with you. And David, I'll toss this one to you.
Yeah, so in the April 30th Automating Assessment Working Group, they did an Ask Me Anything with Pete Waterman. And much like what we're doing with you folks today, they opened up the online Q&A to provide feedback and questions from the audience. And I wanted to bring to you first I wanted to bring to you the link that you can actually watch the replay, available out on YouTube. And it's in the YouTube FedRAMP channel under their video section, or the direct link here in the PowerPoint slide. But so the key takeaways from that was a question came up of, what if this fails? What if 20x fails? And he indicated that 20x is plan B. The traditional assessment process is plan A. Another thing that he commented on was the KSIs could and probably will change over time. And that'll be based on community input, such as what you folks can provide and such as what we'll be providing, especially around those KSIs against MITRE attack values. But he really emphasized that the pilot is based on the KSIs that are listed in that RFC today. There's a strong emphasis on providing machine-readable data for the FedRAMP PMO. But the PMO doesn't have a system to ingest that machine-readable data. And there's not a standard yet developed for that machine-readable interchange. The question came up about OSCAL, and Pete replied that it doesn't need to be OSCAL. And for those of you not familiar with it, it's the Open Security Controls Assessment language, which was co-developed by NIST and FedRAMP. But without some way of ingesting that, I'm not sure how they're going to adjudicate it. And the final comment there is, if this pilot is successful, their intent is to do a similar pilot for the moderate impact level and also entertain other commercial frameworks like ISO 27001. So like I said, I would highly encourage everyone on the call, if you did not watch it live, watch the video replay of that, because there's a lot of good information in that.
That's fantastic. And we'll keep adding to these key takeaways, because sometimes the key takeaways, David, are coming from LinkedIn comments. They're coming from GitHub. And so it's sort of it's certainly a part-time job to try to keep up with all of the places where comments may pop up to kind of keep up on the ideas that are coming. But this is a fantastic slide of key takeaways, and really appreciate, bringing this to our members and to all of you to be able to kind of stay up to date. We do have a couple of questions, but before we dig in, I wanted Fred to just kind of toss to you anything else to add on the Automating Assessments Working Group call or otherwise.
I do not. I've been involved in the continuous reporting a little bit, and it is interesting as KSIs became a subject of conversation. And that group is now sort of digging in, and there's a lot of sort of very technical about, what's the technology you might move objects with. And so it's interesting, but I think a lot of it is sort of waiting to see what happens with this bigger picture. And I do think there's a couple questions that we absolutely should hit. And I think it's also important just to kind of remind people as we go through this. This is our takeaways as we're reviewing and sharing with you. And, we drop those links in because, this is our interpretation and as we've watched it, but I think it's important for folks who are really interested to dig in and say, these guys are not speaking for FedRAMP. We're not authoritative on this.
Right.
We understand the space and we're doing the best we can to inform our members where we think things are headed. But
yeah, and I think that's interesting. That's such a great, I think that's really important because I'm sort of laughing here, David. I saw your comment to Troy's comment on the KSIs and, are the KSIs and validations meant to replace NIST 853? You said, yes, I think so. And I was thinking, I think the jury's out. I view the KSIs as they're trying to group controls for reporting purposes to make it more easily digestible for the agencies and meaningful for them. So rather than, and that it was, and I could be complete, right? We all watch these groups differently, but that was my interpretation when I was watching the initial sessions, was that, part of it's driven by how do we automate this reporting so that at the end of the day, when we're showing it to, agencies, it means something to them. But to your point, David, what's weighted? How is it weighted? Is, because you may be firing 6 out of the 8 or 7 out of the 9 really well, doing well, but maybe the 2 that you're failing are the most important for security, right? And I just made that up. But as an example, we know that the nuances matter, and so that's why having these questions. So I think the jury's out on NIST 853 is my interpretation, but I could be wrong on that. So I don't know. Fred and David, I'll invite you to respond accordingly. But Fred and others who may have insights would welcome that.
Well, I have no insight. I agree. I mean, it's good to see the reference across, but I wouldn't, automatically jump to that's what it will be. I do personally think that where, FedRAMP was so in the 853 space, the agencies who will now be doing so much of the review have that understanding in their DNA. Providers, I mean, because the ecosystem is there, if I had to guess, I'd say they'll probably stay close to it, but that's purely a guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think as Troy summarized in here, it's an important question that we all need clarification probably on. And the answer may be they don't know yet.
Yeah. And I'm watching the chat with Linda and Troy and others regarding, are the KSIs meant to replace or supplement or lead into the 853 controls? Watch the video. There is a point where Pete mentions that he's not convinced the 853 is the right direction. There's a point where he mentions he's not convinced that OSCAL is the right way to go about things. So take a look at that video, draw your own conclusions. The conclusions I've drawn is that they are meant to replace the 853, but there are mappings that take you to the 853. So you could read it both ways.
All right. We, lots of great questions that are being posted in the comments and comments as well around these KSIs. I think it really speaks to a little bit of the ambiguity that still exists. So it'll be, and I think that's also been a common comment throughout the threads of the working groups. And actually, Thomas brings up one that for KSIs that group NIST 853 controls from the 18 control families, are there controls that are not included in the grouping? And what I would note there is we haven't done that analysis. I would suspect the answer is yes. But right now, the KSIs that they showed here, I'm going to pull up this slide really quickly. In that it's only for low impact. So I would keep that in mind too.
And I liked that, has it happened? It feels like that is something we also should do. And then back to David's thought about using the MITRE ATT&CK framework to then sort of analyze like the stuff that is not included, what was, look at impact levels and see where that lands. So I think that would be a helpful exercise for us to go through at least. Yeah.
The other thing that kind of comes to mind, and Bill, thank you for your comment, is sort of like, what do the agencies need, right? If we zoom out and think about, well, what does the greater ecosystem and industry need? From a government perspective, we have really leaned into a couple of strategic initiatives around framework harmonization. When we zoom out and think about the impact on the industry, we think about state and local governments needing to conform with all of those different federal regulations that flow down to states and locals, whether that's the FBI CGIS, IRS, Pub 1075, right? The MMIS, MARSI 2.0, all the different healthcare, HIPAA security privacy rules, all of that, I do think needs to be part of the bigger conversation, because, what we don't want to see is less harmonization or a whole new framework created, but we need to think about, how does this map into what the agencies need? Bill, to your point, what does, is needed to meet FSMA requirements, and, what is going to allow us to get toward that audit once, to use many kind of approach eventually. David, I'm borrowing one of your terms, I love them. That audit once, use many, to be able to satisfy these different requirements where applicable. It's not to try to set the highest bar for everyone, but it's to allow that tailoring where it makes sense. But to allow that tailoring where you need it, you've got to have a common framework, a common baseline that we're working from. So I do get a little concerned about making up our own or diverging from NIST 853, because we've seen that be so helpful, for example, when we've worked in our CGIS task force to create that overlay that aligns with CGIS. That would have been incredibly difficult to do, if not impossible, without having NIST 853 there as the backbone. Oh yes. Now, other comments or questions. There's a doozy in the chat that I love. So as we think about other things that are happening, there's a lot happening right now that I think, I think change is exciting. I think when we are shaking things up, it allows us an opportunity to rethink things, reimagine how things could be, and lean forward. There is a reminder in the chat, JT, thank you. The Department of Defense released, actually, maybe it's 3 separate RFIs this week, or 2 separate RFIs, but all around how to really shift away from the traditional risk management framework and ATOs to kind of evolving CONMON and a different way to expedite that process. So I think there's a lot that we're going to learn from what they're doing. There's a question out there, Fred, David, is there a concerted effort by GRC vendors to get their platforms GovRAMP authorized, as that would be helpful? It's a great question. We have seen some of that.
Yes, yeah. There is. We've been talking to many of those GRC vendors, some of which have already passed the authorization point, and you can find those on our authorized product list on govramp.org.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you. Yes, those 3 RFIs from DoD are out there, and thank you, JT. The timeline is with a due date of May 20th. Any other comments or questions? I'll turn to Fred and David first, so that gives everyone who's participating a chance to type any last-minute comments or questions you may have.
I just want to start with thanking everyone for participating today, for providing the feedback, commentary. Let's keep the discussion going. We are here to service you. We want to make sure that we're representing our constituents, the service providers, the state, local governments properly. So please, reach out to us as individuals, reach out to us as groups. If you have some things that you want to provide or some insight that you didn't want to throw into the chat, and if you want to schedule a private meeting with us, do that as well.
Yeah.
How can you follow a statement like that? As David said, thank you. Yeah, I mean, times, interesting times for sure. And I think, I am frequently going back to thinking about this from a state perspective and some of the challenges that they're facing right now with, taking on more responsibility with changes in DC and what this sort of flow down can mean for them and what they can trust. So, really important. And I think our mission here at GovRAMP is, all that more important for them as they think about places where maybe they've accepted authorizations, these conversations about boundaries and what is accepted. And, our service to our members on that front is really key. And then also making sure, as we serve governments, one of the messages from them is we want security and we want a very vibrant and rich marketplace with which to get it. And so, as these changes come into play, that mission remains important to make sure that it is our providers are able to demonstrate security, that they are secure, and that the governments are able to, focus on their mission and not have to worry about cyber as much. So thank you all for comments and participating in these.
Yes, I, just would echo all of that. I've been going through the chat to try to make sure we caught everyone. I realized one I forgot, so I just sent you my email so we can connect with your organization, Jerry. But otherwise, would invite you to stay in touch. You can reach all of us. Our emails are super easy. First name @govramp.org. Our next GovRAMP working session is Friday, June 20th. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to report back to you by then. It's not that far away, but we know a lot will happen. And just very much appreciate all of your time and all that you do. And with that, we will conclude this session. Know that we're going to post this on our website. We're going to be following up with you so that you've got a link to this presentation as well, and hope to connect with you soon. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.